Hello, everyone. This is Ali Siadatan from Thinking in Productions. I'm kind of continuing this series. Sorry, I'm just going to adjust myself here. Continuing this series that I've started where I'm opening up the different topics, the bodies of knowledge that went into the documentary that I released in 2006, UFOs, Angels, and Gods, which uncovered many things. The connection between the sons of God and this whole concept of the Nephilim that I'm going to talk about today, the idea between the sons of God and the gods of the nations, something that's only being talked about recently. The whole concept of chariots and vehicles in the Bible and how it may connect to the UFO phenomenon and Bible prophecy in the context of the second coming of the Lord. So it was a very groundbreaking work, and the Lord really labored in our spirit and revealed all kinds of things to us. And I see now with the passage of time that the knowledge of these things have continued to expand, and I see that as a sign of the fact that really God wants these things to be known. And never really had a chance to touch base and explain the different research that went into it. And so I'm making this series of videos that you can watch on this channel, each about a different topic. I've done one on the chariots, I've done on the sons of God. Today I'm doing it on the Nephilim and what I discovered and how it kind of took me all the way into researching even the modern day UFO phenomenon and the alien abductions, they're called, and how it may connect to the Nephilim of old and how it all comes together between history and prophecy and all that. So I take you on a journey on into the world of these beings today. And of course, my focus is always the Bible and the Word of God, and what the research is always about revealing more of that to us. So again, the year was 1996, 1997. I was doing my master's degree in French language and literature at the University of Toronto, and I was attending these Bible studies where the Lord, we're a small group, and the Lord really, favored us with all this revelation. As the connection was made between the whole idea of UFOs and the angels that are in the Bible, righteous and fallen, and the whole idea of these vehicles. And we were taking the concept of angels a lot more, I think, very literally. Suddenly, it was like, wow, really, wow. Suddenly, the whole thing becomes very real to you, right? Once, when you look outside the window and someone says, there was an ancient city called Babylon, and you're like, really? And they're like, yeah, But when you look at the end of the 18th century, when Napoleon's soldiers came back from Egypt and they brought drawings of the pyramids, and the Europeans got interested, and in the 1800s, this whole idea of the science of archaeology was created, which was about looking for the roots of Western civilization. The parts of the roots of Western civilization came from the Hebrew Bible. The other came from Greek literature. And the idea was to show that the cities that were mentioned in the Bible were actually real. And even the ports that in Homer's Odyssey, his hero, Ulysses, he goes to all these ports, that those ports were also real, that Western civilization is not founded on myth, but Western civilization is founded on actual history. That was the purpose of archaeology. But it only dawned on them to go look for these ancient cities when Napoleon's soldiers brought these drawings of the pyramids back from Egypt to France. And people went, wait a second, you mean this stuff is still there and we maybe can go and dig it up? And so when they went and dug up the city of Babylon, for instance, the German Orientalist Society that discovered Babylon in 1850, well, you know what? Yes, the Bible always maintained that there was a city of Babylon. It has a great history in the Bible, important kings like Nebuchadnezzar, prophecies that are mentioned about it. God uses it as an instrument of judgment and destroys the first temple through it. I mean, it's a huge, important, but really, it does kind of make it more real, right, to actually discover it. Where I live here, there's a museum called the Royal Ontario Museum, and there's actually a piece of the Wall of Babylon. It has a lion on it, and it's an actual piece of the actual Wall of Babylon with a lion, and it's there, right? And you can go and actually you can actually touch it and everything, even though you think you're not supposed to, but it's right there, and you're thinking, wow. when Daniel was taken captive into Babylon, maybe he walked by this thing and maybe he saw this very lion, for all I know. But the point is, I think it kind of makes it real, right? So when we connected the UFOs phenomenon to the angelic phenomenon of the Bible, I think it did make it real in a whole new way. Not that we didn't have faith in it before, but I think it kind of made us go, oh, okay, like this is very literal. And so as we started to look into all the passages now about angels, the focus came to this passage in Genesis chapter 6, where it said, and it's become a famous passage since, it says, and I'll read it to you, it says, now when humankind began to multiply on the face of the ground and daughters were born to them, then the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were good, and they took for themselves wives, and any they chose. Then Adonai said, my spirit will not remain with humankind forever, since they are flesh, so their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim, which is translated often as the giants, were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, whenever the sons of God came to the daughters of men and gave birth to them. Those were the mighty men of old, men of renown. And suddenly we were reading this, and it's like, what? The angels, the sons of God, that's the angels. They had relations with the humans. Now, if you go into the book of Job, I think it's Job 38, verse 7, it says that the sons of God were here when the earth was created, before even Adam was created. So they're definitely, the sons of God cried out for joy when God created the earth. So they were already here, right? It's like, now this passage saying they had sexual relations, it seems, with human females, and they took wives, and they had these children, the giants. So suddenly we're looking at this and we're going, wow, this is real, right? This is what it says. Wow. So I went to the University of Toronto, and the city didn't have high-speed internet. It had dial-up, but we had pretty fast internet. But the internet was pretty empty. There was a search engine called Netscape, and that's how you went on the internet. And that was the browser, Netscape. The main search engine was Yahoo. I'm pretty sure Google wasn't invented yet, because I used Google for the first time many years after that. So it was called Yahoo. That was the main search engine that average people used, because the idea was that there'll be different search engines for, like, scientists, will use a different search engine. It would be more like, search engines would be more like specialized, right? This was like the everyday man search engine, Yahoo. So I put in the word Nephilim in Yahoo because I looked up the Hebrew of the word giants, and it said Nephilim. Okay, so I put up the word Nephilim in Yahoo, and it said 0 search results found. 0 search results found. And that was the end of my search. And I'm like, okay. So then I looked around libraries. I did find a piece of paper, I photocopied it, and I found just this little thing that said something about a Jewish, I think, myth about Lilith, something about a monster that came to life, but nothing about the Nephilim. I couldn't find any information. So the only thing left was the Bible itself, right? So I looked into the Hebrew, like, to see like what word it came from, and then we just started to look into the rest of the Bible and saw that, okay, there's many passages where these guys are mentioned. Like when they come into the promised land, they encounter these giants, right? They in fact, that's when it's in the book of Numbers. It's Numbers chapter 13. They send these spies to the land, and the spies come back and they say, oh, there's giants in the land and we can't take them. And there are all these tribes mentioned, the Anakim, the very important tribe, it seems, the sons of Anak, the Rephaim, the Zanzumin. So there are all these, different tribes mentioned, and the Amorites. Yeah, the Zamzumin, the Ammonites, Rephaim. So all these tribes are mentioned. And it's like, wow, there's all these tribes of these giants that were living in the land. And it says, for instance, Og, who, they encounter these two kings, Og and Sion. And I mean, Og is a pretty, like, if you had a giant, you'd have to call it Og. Like, what are you going to call your son? Og. Yes, Og the giant. And it was like, okay, he says that I think it's right here for only Og of Bashan survived from the remnants of the Rephaim. In fact, his bed was made of iron, and it gives the size and 9 cubits. I think it's 13 feet long and 6 foot wide. Was his bed, which was also his seat of rulership, right? The kings essentially ruled out of these, what looked like beds. You can see also, I think, even in the Roman chair. The Roman chair kind of looks like a bed. They kind of lounge on it, I guess it's a sign of, you don't even have to sit up because people just do stuff for you. I think that's maybe the idea. I'm not sure. So it was like, wow. And Goliath, he was one of them, right? Because they're also mentioned in the book of Kings and Samuel. Like Goliath, he's the descendant of these giants, and he's got brothers. He's got 4 brothers, and I think that's why the King David, or the boy David, he took 5 stones with him because he was going to destroy these guys. And then when we came into the New Testament with this idea, because suddenly it was like, wow, these fallen angels, because this must be fallen angels, they're having relations with humans, and they're creating these lines of giants. And it's all over the Bible suddenly. Like our eyes were opening up to this. There was no external document. I'm telling you the story that led to the making of UFOs, angels, and gods, and the different bodies of knowledge that went into it, and all that I discovered along the way. And this is how it happened. And so when we looked at the New Testament, the parable of the wheat and tare now looked with fresh eyes. It said that it's in Matthew chapter 13, verse 24 to 43. First, he tells the parable, and he says he presented to them another parable, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed seed in the field, but while the men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. Now, when the stack sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also sprouted. And a lot of translations say tares. And so it's the parable of wheat and tares. And apparently in Hebrew, the tares are like genetically modified wheat. I discovered this years later, but apparently that's what it is. And so then it's very interesting because the wheats and the tares, they grow together. The slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Master, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Then where did the weeds come from, like the tares? He replied, an enemy did this. Now the slaves said to him, do you want us then to go out and gather them up like the tares? But he says, no, for a while you're gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At harvest time, I will tell the reapers, first gather up the weeds and tie them in bundles to burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn. And when they came into the house, the disciples said to him, what did you mean? What was the inner meaning of the parable? He said, well, the one sowing the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. And the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one. The sons of the evil one. Now, you can say, well, it's people that follow the decrees of Satan. We see this idea that Satan issues commandments to Eve and lies about the commandment of God. So there's word coming from the enemy, and there's always more than one word, one meaning to these things. But this idea of the angels actually having children with humans, this made the story very literal. Suddenly you could go, wait, the enemy, so the weeds are the sons of the evil one? Wow. And we know that God planted his own image in the Garden of Eden. Was there something else planted into the human race? And is that what this parable is about? The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. And I'm going to come back to that. So something so interconnected that if you take out the tares, he says you're going to take out my wheat too. Wait until the end of the age, until the time of judgment. Perhaps by that time, all the souls that are going to be born into the kingdom are already among the human world, and now you can really take out the other ones. Because imagine if wheat and tares growing together, if this idea that these guys, did this before the flood, and it says also in Genesis chapter 6, it says that the Nephilim, these giants, who were the children of these sons of God, existed before the flood, and also it says that they existed afterwards, right? It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men and gave birth to them. So it happens then and afterwards, right? So if this is something that's happened throughout in the Middle East, they actually had tribes of these giants that you could hire and pay to fight as your champions. And that's what the Philistines did, right? The Philistines were not a tribe of giants, but Goliath of Gath, who lived among them, and his brothers were, because the Philistines had hired them to represent them as champions. You see, when you wanted to go to war, instead of having the whole nation go to war, you would have a champion from each side. And the idea was, that the gods, in the case of Israel, they were monotheistic, so the gods, but in the culture, everybody else was polytheistic. So the idea was that, somehow divine ordinance had decided who was going to win. The battle of the champions really decided the fate of the war, right? There was no point to have all these people die, because, if my champion won, it meant that fate would favor me. Anyways, I would win the whole war. So the champions would fight instead of the army fighting, right? We should probably go back to that. Can you imagine just, every country sends a commando. It's like, this Navy SEAL will represent, the West, go, and off he goes, or the United States. So basically, this story was coming to life for us, and we were looking at all these passages and going, wow, this is a huge thing in the Old Testament, and the Lord is saying that this continues even into the end of the age, if indeed the parable of wheat and tares can be taken literally, that God planted his seed into the garden, and the evil one came and literally planted his literal seed into the garden. And so suddenly it was like, okay, this is interesting. But outside of the Bible, I couldn't find, any information on this. I didn't know of any Christian writers. The internet wasn't as developed. There was no social media. I looked into the library. I couldn't find much. It was an interesting story. And it was like, okay, here's another interesting piece of a puzzle. And then I think it was the fall of 2000. I went to a Christian book expo in Toronto, and just walking around the expo, looking at different booths. And I went around this booth, and it was a wall of tapes, of cassette tapes. And I was just looking at the wall of cassette tapes, and then suddenly it said, "The Return of the Nephilim." It was like a cassette tape, right? And I was like, what? Someone's talking about this, Return of the Nephilim. Who is this? And it was Chuck Missler. That was his name. So I bought it, and then I became, a big student of Chuck Missler's, and I listened to, I really got into his ministry, listened to as many tapes as could, read, I think, all the books he ever wrote, took courses with him, and met him several times, had dinner with him, had private Bible studies with him. So, I was like, wow, somebody actually is talking about this. So I bought it, and came home and listened to the tape, and it was very informative, in the sense that he went through the Bible. He gave kind of the etymology of the word Nephilim. He said it came from Nephal, it means to fall, and went through the Bible, and that was good. And as we were thinking, and so I wasn't learning about the stuff he was saying because I had already seen all the stuff that was in the Bible, um, and but it did kind of start to get me to think deeper about the whole thing, and the idea that all of these cultures in the ancient past, all the ancient civilizations talked about the children of the gods and men. The Greeks called them the Titans. Then, the demigods is probably the term that we hear about all the time. Okay, so the Indians, the main text of Hinduism, of ancient Hinduism, is the Rig Veda, and it's the worship of Indra, who is a demigod, who's half human, half god. So it's like, wow, these guys were worshipped. They had cult centers. Of the Chinese, the Indians, the Mesopotamians, everyone talked about these guys, and all the way into the Greco-Roman world, like Hercules, a very famous son of Zeus, or King Minos from the island of Crete. Suddenly, all of these things that were classified as myths, were coming to my consciousness as, wait a second, so this is all history? And probably the most famous of all of these ancient, giants that are not in the Bible is Gilgamesh. He's probably the most famous of them all. And he lived in the city of Uruk in the south of Iraq. And I have some hot off the press recent research about what may be happening with his tomb that is in the river Euphrates. If you look it up, you will see that there was a BBC article that his tomb was discovered. Actually, you know what? I'm going to look that up for you later and show it to you in a second. But there's some new information about it. I spoke with the people who did the original discovery of the tomb. So it's like all of these stories were suddenly coming to life, and it was like, wow, this is all real. And so now I had found this guy, Chuck Missler, and he'd written a book called Alien Encounters. This was the book, right? And so I was like, okay, I got to read his book. And I read his book, and he went through the story of UFO research, and I was very familiar about that, with that at this point. But there was one line in his book that drew me in. He said that there may be a connection between the whole story of the Nephilim that is in the Bible and the modern day alien abduction phenomena, because he said the Lord said that it would the end times would be like the days of Noah. It's in Matthew chapter 24, and he said the days of Noah were not just the days of depravity, but they were actually the days of the Nephilim. And these guys, they created a kingdom on the earth that God came and destroyed through the flood. He kind of purified the earth, through it. It's like the waters of purification. I guess maybe that's where the idea of baptism maybe originates from there. I don't know. So I thought, okay, that's an interesting idea. If the Lord says it'd be like the days of Noah, and he's saying, we could be very much living in those days because there's a convergence of prophetic signs, and this could be one of them. That's why some Christian researchers are interested in this phenomenon of abductions, because it may have a connection with the story of the Nephilim. And it's a sign that we have entered into the days of Noah. There's a return, of the Nephilim. And that line stayed with me. I was like, it was just, he doesn't really get into it in this book or even on his tapes, but it stayed with me because I think it was the Lord's will. It just like clung to me. And I was like, I have to look into that. And the reason that Chuck wouldn't look into these things was because basically he was a person with an important ministry and he had donors. And, even this book that he published, he was a friend of Harvest House Publishing, the biggest publishing house of the Christian world. And he invited the president to his house for dinner. And he pitched the book to him about this whole idea of that's one of the signs of our times is the reemergence of these Nephilim. And the president of Harvest House Publishing said, I'm sorry, I can't print the book because the Lord said that the angels neither marry, they don't marry, they don't have kids. So That's not possible. There's no way that angels and humans had these relations, because the Lord said angels do that. And so I can't publish the book. And Chuck was like, yeah, but these are fallen angels, right? They have left, their natural way, and they have come to engage in things that are not of the Lord. I mean, that's when you look at all these tribes in the Old Testament, where God orders the destruction of the entire tribe, men, women, and children, and people look at this and go, what's going on? Well, in Genesis chapter 10, we have the 17 nations that are the basis of the human race. These tribes are given no genealogy. They're not of the human race. They're not ever supposed to exist. In fact, I'd say the first time we really get a list of these tribes, it's in Genesis chapter 14, when God puts his hand on Abraham and chooses Abraham and to be a blessing to the nations. These guys essentially, they kidnap. There's a war where Lot, his nephew, is kidnapped, and he goes to war against 10 kings in order to free his nephew. But if you look at a lot of these kings that are mentioned, these tribes that are mentioned in that war, later they're mentioned in the list of Nephilim tribes. So I think that the enemy goes, let's get this guy. Somehow the world is about to reemerge in a new way. And this whole thing begins a war against the people of God, and this becomes one of the ways that the enemy reaches into the human world. And remember, humans were made in the image of God, so connecting their bloodlines into ours is really connecting their houses of rulership into the race that was made in the image of God. And if you have an ambition to create an alternative kingdom, make yourself the boss and recreate people in your image, attack the very thing that God had put his image on and recast it in your own image, make yourself the king, God forbid, and take, your revolution into the heavens. This is a massive plan of mixing races, replacing races. It's a power play, but it has specific purposes in scripture at different times. Like Chuck used to say, every time God reveals his plans, the enemy puts landmines. God says to Abraham, I'm going to bring your children to this land. The enemy covers it with these giants. So when they come, they're scared to go in, and they end up wandering in the desert for 40 years. But eventually they do go in. If you go to the city of David, I'm going to put a picture of this on my blog. I went to the city of David in Jerusalem, and there's this, you go down there and they've dug up this giant structure, huge stones, just a massive stone. And it's an aqueduct that connects it was basically water, was pools, and then it goes into the city. They would come down and they would grab water, and they built this wall and this kind of tunnel around the water to protect the water. And the giants built it, apparently. It says that right there. It says, when you go there, it quotes the verses from the writings of Moses from the Torah that say that, the giants were living here, suggesting they built this, right? So even the archaeologists said this. And I once asked an archaeologist, I'm like, wow, the Israeli Archaeological Society put this verse there saying that giants built this? And he said, well, just because the Bible says that this is who is living in the land, right? Not that we believe in it. Well, they're kind of more secular minded. So, but there's evidence, evidence of their existence. You look at the island of Malta, where there's this oral tradition, because you go to Malta and there's these giant stone structures that are 7,000 years old. And it's like, who built these? Well, there's an oral tradition that the giants did it. I'll tell you a story. I'd gone to Persepolis, the ancient capital of the Persian Empire. And I was visiting my dad, and we were walking around these ruins. And my dad said, he's an architect. Well, he's passed away now. He was an architect. And he said, this would be difficult for us to build even today. These pillars, they're not easy to lift up. You'd have to use cranes. I wonder how they built this stuff. I mean, there's these gigantic pillars, there's 100 of them, and there's a room of 99 pillars, it's called. You can Google Persepolis, you'll see there's a whole place of pillars still there. And so I was like, yeah, I don't know how they built it. And there was a man there, and he was a kind of a villager from one of the villages around, and he was there with his family. It was like a day off, and he had brought them to see the ruins of Persepolis. And jokingly, really jokingly, I turned around to him and I said, "Sir, how do you think they build this stuff?" And he kind of straightened his back suddenly, looking forward, like he was about to deliver a serious answer to me. And I was like, "Wow, he really took my question seriously." I'm like, "Well, I wonder what he's going to say." He said, "Well, they're ancient cuneiform tablets. And in these tablets, it's recorded that they had champions living with them, and these champions were giants, and they are the ones that helped them build these places." So he said there were champions who were giants. I mean, that's the story of Goliath. He was a champion, he was a giant. And this is a guy, he's a villager from around Persepolis in Iran. And he says that the cuneiform tablets of the Persian Empire record that there were giants living among them, right? So the infiltration of these bloodlines into the human world, even the Greeks, you look at where does Western civilization begin? In the island of Crete. That is where archaeologists say is the oldest place, the first remnants of what is considered to be Western civilization comes from the island of Crete. Who was the first king of Crete? Minos. Who is Minos? The son of Zeus and Europa. So, and if you look at my altar of Pergamum video that's also on this channel, apparently it seems that the Lord revealed to us that Zeus was with a mask that Satan was wearing. So that means that the Western world begins with a line, of Zeus himself. Or you look at all of these 7 congregations that the Lord writes letters to. Most of them were founded by Nephilim. Those 7 cities, not the congregations, but the cities were founded by Nephilim of the line of Hercules, of Heracles. If you look at the 4 founding tribes of the Greek Empire, the Ionians, the sons of Javan, they're mentioned in the Bible as descendants of Japhet. That's where the Hellenistic Empire, the Hellenistics get their name from. But you see, one of the other tribes that's foundational to the Greeks, there are 4 tribes, were the Dorians. The most famous family of the Dorians were the Spartans. And it's well known that the Dorians were famous for having a line of kings among them that were descendants of Hercules, who was himself a Nephilim of Zeus, right? Suddenly, all these stories, they suddenly can be taken literally. That the reason our ancestors collectively from China to Europe wrote about these guys and talked about them and worshipped them. And you look at the list of the kings of Mesopotamia, the ancient list of kings, the Sumerian king list. Google it. Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, is mentioned as one of the kings, and then his the date of his rule is there. And you think, wow, our ancestors, our collective ancestors, they weren't crazy. They weren't just like, oh, let's just like, we love fairy tales. Oh. But then suddenly the 19th century came and we evolved, and Darwin came and philosophy came and science came and we realized, we were so silly. No. We were the descendants of the one who was made in the image of God. From the beginning, we were civilized. We have not changed very much, over the years. I was watching a science fiction movie the other day with my daughter, and she said, in all these science fiction movies, the future always looks different technologically, but the people are the same. And I said, honey, we have never changed. That's why the laws of God apply to all the generations. We have the same passions and struggles and wonderful things about ourselves that the ancient people did, that King David did, that the characters of the Bible did, because we're like genetic copies of each other. We just keep going forward and forward. We're images and images and images and images. We just keep duplicating the same thing, right? So our ancestors were not any more crazy or any less crazy than we are. They weren't idiots either. They created the world that still we are living in. They laid the pillars of civilization: mathematics, geometry, architecture, medicine, writing, laws, religion, government, military. Where do you think all this came from? Do you think we just created this in 1776? No, This was you go back to the ancient, most oldest place in the world, the cradle of civilization, and you find all of these things there already. So you're going to tell me that these guys were just collectively made up fairy tales and recorded it in their tablets? Oh, there were giants living among us and they helped us build this stuff. Yeah, put that in there, Jack. Why? Well, because people in the future, they'll like it. They'll like it. You know, no, just put it in there. Put it in there. Is that how it happens? Like, that's insane. No, what happens is that some of the people who control the academic world, they have difficulty accepting the true nature of reality. They have reimagined the human race, and they have relegated to mythology that which is history, right? The problem is the gatekeepers of information. They're the ones. But now we live in the age of information where you and I can research these things for ourselves and follow the Bible into the true nature of reality, because that's what the Bible teaches us. The Bible teaches us first and foremost the true character of God. Who is God? And then from the point of view of God, it informs us about what is happening in the world in which we're living, what's happening in the human heart and condition. How do we get connected spiritually to God and feel his presence in our lives? What is the origins of the human race, and where is humanity headed? What is the meaning of life? What's the destiny of life? All of these things come through. And people like me like to follow the breadcrumbs and say, well, did this city really exist? Were there really giants on the earth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And I get to share my research with you. And if ever you want to support me with donations, because I'm doing this full time now, don't hesitate. So let me continue my story. So Chuck Missler, he's saying, oh, there's a lot of interest in the abduction story because it may relate to the days of Noah. What's happening there? He doesn't get into it because, you know, he needs to keep his ministry up, and he can't get too strange. And remember, he wrote his book in 1997, so, you know, it's not like people were not really into this stuff. So then I go and I start to look into it, and I discover there's a guy, his name is David Jacobs, this guy here, and he is the world's foremost researcher on this whole alien abduction phenomenon, apparently. And I'm like, okay. I mean, to be honest, I thought it was a little bit crazy. Like, I wasn't like, oh, wow. Right? I was like, okay. So I bought the book and I went up to a retreat. It was 170 acres worth of land, one small 100 square foot cabin. And then there was, you know, it was 150 acres with the cabin and 22 acres with the main compound where everybody else was. And I was going to spend the weekend in the cabin meditating and praying. And, you know, I took this book thinking, well, I'm going to read a book. I'll read this. Do not take a highly scary book with you if you ever go in the middle of the woods by yourself. No, take something happy, something with like funny faces and sunshine on it. Don't take a book that's called The Threat with you. So I started reading this book, and yes, these people claim that they're being abducted by aliens, and they come and they see him, and they tell their stories to him, and he does a poll to see what percent of the American people are actually displaying the same type of signs, and it's about 3%, you know, which is what the poll says. He thinks it's more about 5 to 6% because, you know, he was being very conservative in the poll. And so it's a Roper poll, you know, it's a Roper poll, so it's supposed to be very reliable. And as I'm reading the stories that people are telling him, and these are very important people, like people who have important jobs that we respect, doctors and lawyers and judges and professors and police officers and teachers and housewives, people that we trust with important jobs. And they're telling this crazy story that they're getting abducted by aliens. So they're getting abducted from childhood into old age, and hybrids are being created. And I don't want to tell the story because if you watch my documentary at the top of this page, UFOs, Angels, and Gods, the second half, you know, I actually had to go down and interview this guy. I was like, what? So as I'm reading the story, I mean, it's all in there. It's easier for you just to watch it. It's much better than repeating it to you. So they're creating these hybrids, these alien human hybrids. And since I understood by now that the alien presence was in fact, related to the angelic world and to the fallen angelic world specifically, when you look at the modern day UFO phenomenon, which is a subcategory of the larger, angelic reality, because even God comes back with his chariots. Suddenly, this and the story of the Nephilim of old, now I see why Chuck had pointed to it. He was like, there's a connection here. This is the days of Noah, and there's a reemergence of these phenomenon. Hybrids were being created, and this man was documenting it in great detail, that hybrids were being created among us in the human world. And as I'm reading the book and I'm realizing this is actually real, I'm seeing the value of the research. I'm seeing how he's written it. I'm seeing what people are saying to him. I'm seeing who these people are. And I'm like looking outside the window at night, it's all pitch black, just the stars. And I'm like, oh boy, whoa. So by the end of the weekend, I remember walking back to the main compound and I had an idea, and it ran through my head as I was walking through the fence, and the idea was, wait a second. So when God says that he puts enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, this is actually real. And what's going to happen is that there's actually going to be, this leader, this world leader. If we're really living in this time that these prophecies are coming true, this idea that the world leader is actually going to be a Nephilim. He's going to be of the bloodline of all of these connections, but he's going to be of the bloodline of Satan himself, whether he's created during this abduction phenomenon. I mean, that's what it seemed to me right then, that the purpose of this is to create the Antichrist. But now I think maybe it's just that he's born into the bloodline, because this is a bloodline that is of old, like King Minos, but maybe it's also new. I'm not there while they're creating this guy, but I started to see there was a connection. And I thought, I got to tell the whole world. I think that was the moment where all of these things you're seeing here began. I was like, I got to tell people what's going on. Nobody knows this. Nobody knows that this is actually happening in the world in which we live, and it's connected to the Bible's historical accounts and prophetic accounts. Because Chuck opened my mind to this idea that in Daniel chapter 2, in the King James version, but it's actually accurate. I think it's in verse 42 or 43. It says, talking about the final empire, the one that is in place when the Lord comes, it says, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but it shall not adhere. And the word they is a masculine Hebrew pronoun. And then it said in the next verse, it says, and it's in the days of these kings that God will establish a kingdom on the earth. So you get the impression that they're going to mingle with the seed of men. This is going to create these kings, and the they that mingle with the seed of men to create these final kings of the earth are in fact masculine pronoun, masculine plural pronoun. So it's the he's. And you go, when did that ever happen? Well, the Lord said it'd be like the days of Noah, and the days of Noah, are the days of the sons of God and daughters of men, and it's explained in the book of Enoch. By the way, speaking of the book of Enoch, I don't know if you know about my Facebook page. It's at UFOs, Angels, Gods, one word. I have lots of stuff there I put all the time, including a video I just made about the book of Enoch. So follow it if you have it, and you can benefit from all the information that's there. So this whole idea that they will mingle their seed with the seed of men, that there'll be 10 kings that will emerge out of this commingling of seeds. Now this, in light of the historical account of the sons of God and daughters of men, in light of this continued presence in human history, in light of the parable of wheat and tares, that this is continuing till the end of the age, and in light of the modern day creation of hybrids, which was now what this book was explaining, I suddenly could see that this could all be very, 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 very literal. Like they're actually creating these mixtures of the houses of the fallen angels to be ruled by one who is of the seed of the leader of the fallen angels. And this is the guy that the Lord is going to come to humble. And the story of David and Goliath now becomes truly a symbol of this final end time battle. Why? Because David is the ancestor of the Messiah and a type of the Messiah. And Goliath, who is a hybrid, a Nephilim, is an actual type of the Antichrist. And that's why God chose a Nephilim to play that role, because the Antichrist is going to be one too. And it was like mind-boggling. It was, your brain is going like, right? So this was very important revelation. So I started to look deeper into the story of these guys who were researching this, and I discovered that John E. Mack, the head of Harvard Psychiatry, he wrote a book in 1994. He looked into the whole abduction phenomenon, and he wrote a book in 1994 called Abductions, in which he said it was all real, because he had interviewed enough people, and he said he understood when people lied or told the truth. He said these people had no reason to lie. They had very normal lives, and there was no reason for them to fabricate this. And he said there's a way people speak and formulate their thoughts and sentences when they're telling the truth. And everyone he interviewed, because he actually started to research abductions in order to debunk it and to say this is something, a disease, a psychological disorder akin to demon possession from the Middle Ages. That's his words, not mine. But then in 1994, he shocked the academic world by writing a book in which he said, it's all true. And from then on, he himself became a very important researcher of alien abduction and the creation of hybrids and all of that. And Dr. Jacobs, who was he? Another Ivy League professor. He was a professor of the history of 20th century American culture. And that's how he came across UFOs, because that was part of American culture. And he's a historian of American culture. And he was like, well, and he looked into it, and then boom, he met a friend, Bud Hopkins, who was actually Bud Hopkins, another one of these important researchers of abduction phenomenon. He was probably the first guy to really, write a book about this phenomenon of abductions. In fact, he coined the word hybrid. Bud Hopkins coined the word hybrid. They're called Nephilim. They already had a word. They're called giants, titans, demigods. This is not a new thing. There is nothing new under the sun, says King Solomon, right? And I'm not going to argue with the wisest man in the world. So basically, this whole thing suddenly was being researched by important people. I didn't realize that the researchers were actually themselves not to be taken lightly. People, this wasn't some guy coming out of a trailer, like, the way that people keep trying to put the UFO phenomenon down, and they make it look like some guy just comes and he talks about, probes that were put up his derriere. No. This was like Ivy League professors. And if you look at Bud Hopkins' art, you see the caliber of the mind he had. These guys are talking about this, and they're not just talking about it, they're documenting it in a very meticulous way. And so when I went to see Professor Jacobs in Philadelphia, I got a lot of these drawings that he gave me, and I'm going to do a screen share and share it with you so you can see it. Okay. So I think here we go. So this is some of the drawings that he gave me, and these drawings were made by abductees. Where can you see this? On my website, thinkagainproductions.com. This one here, I mean, look at this. Look at this one here, the mind scan, he calls it. This, what you're seeing here, is actually, if this is all true, if this is real, and the fallen angels are the sons of God, and they're actually doing this to people, then what you're seeing here is an actual drawing of an actual fallen angel. This is one. I don't know. I don't think they're very high in rank, to be honest, the guys that do these things. But these ones, the ones that look like this, are the ones that really scare people. The ones that are here, the grays are called, I'm just going like that, hybrids, those are more like low-ranking workers. But these guys here, the ones, I guess you can't see my finger, these guys here, they always scare people. They're sometimes called the Lizardians, sometimes they're called the insectoids. Different people, call them different things. But I remember once seeing on a documentary a woman who was terrified, talking about it, and she was saying she hates it when one of these guys comes over. And I could see the fear and the honesty on her face, right? So when they look into the eye, what happens is that you start to get thoughts. I mean, they come like an inch away from your eyelids. You start to receive thoughts, or they scan your mind. Where have you been? What have you been doing? Or maybe there's information they want, and so there's telepathy. All right. The ones that are here, these ones here, the ones in the blue here, they don't even have mouths. The guy who drew it, he put mouths because he just thought it was too weird. They didn't have mouths. Professor Jacobs has a theory that these are primitive, basic hybrids, like they created little hybrids a long time ago to serve them, right, in the machinery of abduction. Here, what you see, the sperm removal, the people are put on the bed, they look in the eyes, the person gets sexual thoughts, and he ejaculates into this thing, and that's when the sperm is removed. And then you start to see hybrids being created. This is a hybrid itself. This is a hybrid that looks very human. They keep working until they create very human ones. Everyone talks about these chambers. I know it's crazy, but these chambers where there's liquid and the hybrids are inside of them, because the women say that after the 3rd month of pregnancy, the first trimester, they're abducted and the fetus is removed and they're placed in these things. Here's another picture of the same incubation chamber right there. Incubation chamber. More hybrids in more incubation chambers. This is a hybrid, right? And they kind of take the hybrids and then they take genes out of them. They keep cloning it until they get the 3rd version. Apparently is the one that looks like this. And so here's another one of these sperm removals. This is a family being abducted. This is another one of these fallen angels, I call them, right here. So anyways, and it's very interesting. He's written a book. Hi, it's me again. He's written a new book recently. I think I had it, so here's right. It's called Walking Among Us. And so I went and I interviewed about 20 hours of footage that I'm working on a new documentary. And in this one, he says it's no longer about abductions, that now it's about integration. Like the people who get abducted, they actually don't get taken away. Most of the abduction sequence happens in the world in which we live. They get they're asked to get social security numbers for these guys. They're asked to teach them how to drive. That's a big thing. Go into apartments and make sure it's set up properly, and they live collectively in apartments. I'll tell you a story. In 2015, I was invited to give a talk about all this stuff. And after the talk, this woman came to me and she said, well, why do you speak negatively about these beings? I have been abducted since childhood. In fact, they were there when I was born, flashing lights in the hospital, my mom told me. And I've known them all my life. And there's a whole community of them that live around where I live. And she mentioned where it was, north of the city. And she was just telling me how these are great guys. And suddenly this man came and he bent down. He was like a tall basketball player. He bent down, just so flexible, said something in her ears, and she said, I'll be right there. And he left. And I actually noticed that he was very good at making sure I didn't see his face. And then he left. And then she kept talking to me, and I was like, I started to get very interested in her. At first, I didn't know what to think. Then I looked into her eyes, because they always, the eyes are a gateway into the soul, and these guys look into the eyes. And I tell you, the energy that came out of my eyes hit a wall. I could not penetrate her eyes. And I was like, whoa, I never had experienced that before. It was like there was a wall in her eyes. And then she smiled, like she caught me trying to look into her. So it was a very interesting, experience. She said there's a whole community of them living in the housing where she lives. And she says when she comes out of her house and she they come and say hi to her because they know who she is. And this was like, wow, here's Professor Jacob saying they live among us. They live in homes collectively together. That's what his research shows. And here I am actually meeting a person who's telling me firsthand account of this. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy, but it's real. And so this was I did this talk on the weekend. On Tuesday, someone broke into my office. And then on sorry, I gave this talk on Tuesday. On Thursday, someone broke into my office, and on Saturday, people came and glued and put sticks and glues in the front of the building and in the back of the building that only led to my office. In fact, other people in the building thought that I had, done something to a customer because they're like, okay, this is too close. And once they saw that the back door had glue and sticks put into it and the front door, no one could get in the building. Then they're like, you're the one obviously who's being targeted. And I think it was related to this talk, but I think it was related to the fact that this woman came and talked to me because they like to send you this message, like this is all hush hush, because can you imagine if the entire world really knew that there was these hybrids living among us? Obviously, some people would be like, oh, this is so great. We're being blessed by these alien races going to take us into the next stage of history and Shangri-La and all that stuff. But a lot of people would be like, what? They take their guns and their frying pans and start like, we're not going to, it's just too scary. That's the natural reaction. Be like, give me my pitchfork, right? So I think that there's a beginning to the plan. This is started for a reason. There's a middle and there's an end. There's an end goal. So often the hybrids are told that they tell the abductees, the fallen angels who do the abduction, whisper into the mind of the abductees that there's going to be a time the signal will be given and they will have something to do. They'll have a task. They also talk about environmental disasters. Often I read that in the account of testimonies that there's going to be environmental disasters, and we, these guys will give us the tools we need to deal with it. And you look at the Antichrist, it says that he's going to make fire come from the heaven and do miraculous signs and lying signs and wonders, like to deceive people, right? So it's going to be a time of deception, and I think there's going to be this contact with this world of the fallen angels that is recasting itself as aliens, as UFOs. They're reinventing themselves in our mind. I mean, that's always since the beginning. Satan says to Eve, what did God say about this tree? And then when she says to him what he said, he says, no, that's not the case. It's always about, changing our mind about reality, because the enemy can't change the true nature of reality. It can't change history, but it can change our perception of who was Jesus Christ. Oh, he wasn't the Son of God. He was just a prophet. Oh, he was a humanitarian. Oh, did he even exist? Right? So the Lord speaks the truth into our world, and the enemy can't change the truth, but he can only change our perspective of it. Right? It's always the same. It's one of the it's why it says the Lord said that he was a liar from the beginning. And so I think that it's important to understand that this is real. Now, this stuff that I just showed you, these pictures I showed you, you can see on my website, when the Lord says to the angels, therefore, just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks, and those who practice lawlessness, they will throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun, the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So I think that the reason the angels come to take away these tares, so he's saying, look, the angels are going to come and remove the tares, and they're going to remove those among humans. And the word lawlessness in the Bible refers to those who live without the ordinances of God, right? it's not that they don't follow they don't stop at red lights. No, it just means that they don't live according to the ordinances of God. Lawlessness in the context of God's revealed commandments and instructions and teachings, right? Those who obstinately live outside of it are called the lawless ones, right? So those humans are, God is saying that he's going to remove them out of his kingdom, but it's also saying that he's going to remove the tares that the evil one planted into the kingdom. If you read it, it's in chapter 13 of Matthew. Read verse 37 to 43. And so you think, well, why is he sending angels to remove these tares? Well, because these hybrids that are now among us, who's going to remove them? You, me, right? So at the end of the age, when the Lord returns with his army of angels, it seems that one of the things they're going to do is they're going to remove these guys. And that's what we see always happens to them in the Bible. They eventually, God sends the flood. God sends his, he puts the spirit of mutual destruction in their hearts, it says in the book of Enoch before the flood, and they kill each other. Abraham defeats them. The children of Israel destroy their cities and take over them. David kills Goliath. The two kings of Og and Sihon are defeated and killed. It seems that their destiny is always to meet this end, that they are never meant to exist. And so they're always removed. Now, it's important to have faith that these are just the signs of the times, that God is opening things up to us, but they are not here to scare us, in the sense that, God is firmly in control of the creation. The good guys outweigh the bad guys by tons, just on a whole different scale. The majority of the creation is with God. God is in control. He has sent his son to the earth. His angels are here walking among us. His Holy Spirit has been released into the human world. And so this is just saying, look, it's like when something flowers, even evil can flower, and eventually you put an axe of the tree and cut it down. And once it has flowered and expressed itself, then the time of judgment comes, right? So this is the sign that something is coming to an end, that God is going to cleanse the earth, this time by fire, not by water. So I think that's why when he returns with his chariots, there's going to be a lot of like shooting, I don't know, like we saw how he destroyed the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? The Abraham woke the next day and he saw and you look at the Zechariah 14, where the enemies of Jerusalem are struck down by God, and it says that their tongues, melt in their mouths and their eyes disappear in their sockets, and you think, wow, that's what we consider to be kind of the effects of radiation from the blast, right? And if we are the children of God, and we are able to break the atom in half and make it blow up, and I don't think these are simple things to do. I think this is the stuff we are able to do, splicing and dicing of DNA and the breaking of atom and all that stuff, because we are of the world of God and angels. And that's why we have such high, we're not just above the monkeys and the giraffes by a little bit, right? We're just like, we're sending like rocket ships into the heavens. We're sending rocket ships into the heavens. And these guys are just walking around and eating grass, right? So come on, right? There's a huge difference. So I think so I'm saying the world of God's angels, of course, God is beyond everything, but the world of God's angels and God amongst them returning may utilize some of the things that we are understanding about the created order. So it's important to understand that this is good news, not bad news. You're like, why? This is pretty scary stuff. It's good news because it says that the day of the Lord is close, that we are right now, the sun is setting on the final age of history, and the sun is rising on the Messianic kingdom that all the prophets and the Lord himself spoke of, that people have waited to live in peace and in harmony and under God's own gracious rule, in love, in where predators live together in harmony. It says that in the book of Isaiah, where the children of men no longer instruct each other in the arts of war and put away their swords. And so that is the kind of world that we're heading. So when we see these things, we know that the Lord is on his way, and that we can now understand that the Bible is real. We really are the children of the one who was made in the image of God. The Son of God really came to die for us and he did atone, and he did send his Holy Spirit, and he will give us a new body, and he will usher in a new age of history, and he will redeem the earth, and he will place mankind back, give mankind the place that he had at the beginning of the story in the cosmic order. And yes, we will be in the bosom of God and for ages to come. That, for me, when I read this stuff, and it makes even the most strange parts of the Bible, that angels and men had children that created giants, and somehow prophetically this is supposed to happen in our time, again, at the end, well, in our time, in the time of the signs of the second coming. And since we may be living in those times, we are seeing evidence of this as well, which confirms, it's another sign. How crazy is this? I mean, I now have documented it. I've spoken of it. I've made a documentary about it. I believe it. I read it. But don't think for a second there's a part of my mind that still doesn't go, what? This is right. Of course, I mean, it's pretty out there that this is what's happening. Wow. But it really drives home for me that I am part of a cosmic order, that I am of the world of God and angels. And that's why I'm in such an incredible story. And that the Lord and his angels are in the way, and they're already here with us, some of them. And they walk among us, and people have entertained angels unawares. So be hospitable and all that stuff. And so, I hope that this kind of helps you a little bit in the story of the Nephilim. And watch the documentary, because it will bring it all together. The gods of the nations, the sons of God, the hybrid offsprings, the modern UFO phenomena, history, prophecy, all of these things come together in the documentary UFOs, Angels, and Gods. Anything you see here, you're welcome to share on your Facebook page or elsewhere, on YouTube, and even the documentary. Share that. If you want to support my ministry, because I'm giving myself full time to researching and teaching these end time mysteries, and the Word of God, please, you can go on my support me, because I need to make a living. So you got the I forget, Pantheon account, right? You can see on one of my videos there's a link to my Pantheon account. You can support me through there, through a monthly payment. You can do it through PayPal. Go on my website, thinkagainproductions.com, and click on the donate button. It's at the bottom of the first page, and you can send a donation, and keep me in your prayers, because when you're dealing with this stuff, sometimes things get strange, even though my goal is to actually reveal the full glory and the beautiful things that are in the Word of God. I'm not into, let's talk about dark and strange things. That's not me. But when God has led me into a research about something that I am to expose, sure, that's it. It's done. So there are wonderful things in our future. God has plans to prosper us and to bless us, and to walk into those things is far more beautiful than to ponder the dark things. But this is also part of reality, and it's one of the signs of our times. So I hope that you meditate on these things, and it makes the Bible real for you, and it justifies why these tribes had to be destroyed, and they continue to have a destiny like that. That this God is not cruel; He's cleansing the earth of an aberration. And that the modern UFO phenomenon is clandestine and hidden, and has the creation of hybrids at the center of it, because the agenda may be dark, and it ties into the story that takes us all the way to the days before the flood. And I didn't have a chance to do this for you, but you can go ahead and do it, which is to Google, the tomb of Gilgamesh, and read what it says about the city of Uruk, where he lived. Just say BBC article, Google BBC article, tomb of Gilgamesh, and it's incredible. The city that he lived. Do you want me to do that for you very quickly? So if we go into screen share, and I go here, and bada boom. So, okay. Okay, so if we go here, tomb of Gilgamesh, BBC article, and you go like that, and okay, so it's a very interesting article. It talks about how 2000, the Epic of Gilgamesh, written by a Middle Eastern scholar 2,500 years before the birth of Christ. That is so funny. Written by a Middle Eastern scholar. Okay, the Epic of Gilgamesh, when you read it, and if you were to read like his burial account, when it says the gods parted the river Euphrates, and then they put him in the bedrock, and the chants that these guys are singing in the actual account from ancient Mesopotamia, it's very heavy duty. Even as you read it, you're like, whoa, this is like a religious document. He was the child of the Queen of Heaven, one of the most important fallen angels who continues to have a career to this day. And he was a great, very important king. Commemorate the life of the ruler of the city of Uruk. So it says here, I like this, Venice in the desert. The most surprising thing was that we found structures already described by Gilgamesh, who was himself a Nephilim, and see what I'm saying? You dig into it and you're like, wow, these guys lived. We covered more than 100 hectares. We have found garden structures and field structures as described in the epic. And we found Babylonian houses. But he said the most astonishing find was an incredibly sophisticated system of canals. Very clearly, we can see in the canals some structure showing that flooding destroyed some houses, which means it was a highly developed system. It was like Venice in the desert. So in the south of Iraq, they created a system of canals, like from the river Euphrates, and they created a system of waterways, taking the mighty river Euphrates and bringing the water into their cities, so that when they went from houses to houses, they went with the little boats, right? They got in the little boats and they went from house to house, right? To see each other and to have food. And hey, I'll be at your house. Boop, 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 boop. Going with their system of canals like Venice. And so things that were in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the story of King Gilgamesh, a Nephilim of old, a great Nephilim king of old, that mentioned in the Mesopotamian list of kings, like imagine humans lived in a city that was ruled by a hybrid. And that is recorded in the history books of humanity, in the great account of this list of Sumerian kings he's mentioned. There's an entire epic that describes him. There's a lot of information about him in there. And then we find not only the city that he lived in, Uruk, but we actually find the evidence of his tomb, where it says in the story he was buried in the river Euphrates when the water was parted. And these guys used a magnetic system where they send like magnetic signals, and then they discovered, wow, there is something here. But then this is what happened. The war in Iraq became so intense they couldn't dig it up. They had to leave. But I spoke with them, and they are planning to go back and finish what they started and dig up the tomb of King Gilgamesh, right? A Nephilim hybrid. So hybrids can rule over humans, right? Very important to understand these things. Okay, I think we're done for today. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. God bless you, and please share. Okay, stop.